Chapter 1. The house stood at the edge of the Sussex cliffs, a grand yet brooding estate overlooking the restless sea. Endicott Hall had seen centuries of wealth, scandal, and whispered curses. Tonight it would bear witness to yet another, though only one man could foresee what was to come. "One of us shall die before the clock strikes midnight." The words hung in the air, spoken with eerie conviction by the frail yet commanding voice of Madame Armand, a reclusive fortune-teller who had been invited as an amusement for Lady Eleanor Endicott's birthday dinner. Her cloudy blue eyes swept across the candlelit dining table, lingering on each guest in turn. The assembled party of 12 exchanged uneasy glances. Some scoffed, some shivered. The fire crackled in the grand hearth, casting long shadows over the richly draped walls. It should have been an evening of indulgence, champagne, laughter, and idle gossip. Instead, an invisible thread of unease had woven itself into the fabric of the gathering. "You do not believe me, but the signs are clear," Madame Armand murmured. "Before the hour is done, death shall come to Endicott Hall." "Really, this is absurd." Sir Reginald Mortimer, a retired colonel with a stiff moustache, harumphed. "These theatrical pronouncements, nothing but nonsense." And yet the voice of Lady Eleanor, the formidable hostess, was low but sharp. "The last time you made such a prediction, madam, the unfortunate Lord Whitcomb fell to his death within the hour. Did he not?" A silence settled, thick and watchful. Poirot, seated at the far end of the table, tilted his head slightly. His neatly waxed moustache twitched, his eyes twinkling with detached amusement. He had been invited by Lord Arthur Endicott, the host, for no reason beyond his famed reputation, an eccentric addition to a rather ordinary aristocratic soirée. But now, it seemed, he had arrived at the precise moment fate had intended. "Hercule Poirot!" Lady Eleanor turned her gaze to him, her expression unreadable. "What do you make of such premonitions?" "Madame." Poirot folded his hands carefully before him, his voice smooth as velvet. "I make of them what I make of all things. Reason first, superstition second. And yet—" He paused, surveying the room. "It is often those who mock the irrational who fall prey to its consequences." A low chuckle from a dark-haired woman at the table. Miss Beatrice Vaughan, a sharp-tongued journalist, smirked. "And what will you do, Monsieur Poirot? Prevent fate from claiming its victim." "Fate, mademoiselle?" Poirot smiled. "Fate is but a shade name we give to mysteries yet unsolved." The grandfather clock in the corner chimed. 11 o'clock. 1 hour until midnight. And somewhere within the great house, unseen and unheard, death had already begun to stir. Chapter 2. The conversation at the dinner table resumed, though an uneasy tension remained. Glasses clinked, forks scraped against fine china, and yet the usual laughter of such a gathering had dimmed. The fortune-teller's pronouncement lingered in the air like the heavy scent of candle-wax. Poirot sat back in his chair, watching, listening. He had attended many such soirées, and he knew that in these moments of forced merriment, truth often revealed itself in the smallest gestures. A tightening of the lips, a glance held too long, fingers that drummed against the tablecloth in agitation. Each was a clue, a silent confession waiting to be understood. Across from him, Lady Eleanor Endicott sipped her wine, her sharp eyes scanning the room as if assessing who among them might be next in line for scandal or misfortune. Beside her, Lord Arthur Endicott, her husband, seemed less concerned with ominous prophecies, and more interested in his cognac, swirling it lazily in his glass. Miss Beatrice Vaughan, the journalist, leaned in towards Sir Reginald Mortimer with an amused smirk. "Surely a man of your military background isn't rattled by a little talk of fate, Colonel." Sir Reginald straightened, clearing his throat. "Superstitious nonsense. The woman seeks only to impress with theatrics. I'll not lose sleep over it." "And yet," Madame Armand interjected softly, "you are perspiring, Colonel." All eyes turned towards Sir Reginald. A faint sheen of sweat glistened at his temples, though whether it was the warmth of the fire or something deeper remained unclear. Before anyone could comment, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, causing the heavy drapes to shift. The candles flickered violently, and a log in the grand fireplace cracked, sending a spray of embers onto the rug. Lady Eleanor sighed. "Arthur, really, must we keep the windows open? That infernal draught!" "The windows are closed, my dear," Lord Arthur replied, frowning. A hush fell over the table. The wind had indeed howled through the room, yet not a single window had been left ajar. Madame Armand exhaled slowly. "The house is restless tonight." Poirot arched an eyebrow but said nothing. Instead, he allowed his gaze to drift around the room once more, filing away every detail, every unease, every small betrayal of nerves. Then the scream. A woman's voice, high-pitched and piercing, cut through the chatter like a blade. The sound echoed down the hall, shattering the brittle calm of the evening. Lady Eleanor shot to her feet. "What on earth?" Lord Arthur rose as well, his expression grim. It came from the east wing. Without hesitation, the guests abandoned their seats, following the direction of the scream. Poirot moved at a measured pace, trailing behind the others as they hurried through the dimly lit corridors of Endicott Hall. The grandeur of the house, ornate wallpaper, heavy tapestries, gilded mirrors, seemed suddenly oppressive, as if the walls themselves had grown watchful. At the far end of the corridor, a young maid stood trembling, her hand clamped over her mouth. She pointed with a shaking finger toward a partially open door. Poirot stepped forward, gently nudging the door wider. The room beyond was a study, lined with bookshelves and an imposing mahogany desk. The scent of ink and aged paper hung in the air, but it was the figure slumped in the chair that captured everyone's attention. A man, his name, Poirot recalled, was Mr. Alistair Graves, sat motionless, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His eyes, glassy and vacant, stared at the ceiling. A half-finished letter lay upon the desk, his pen still resting atop the page. He was dead. A gasp rippled through the gathered guests. "My God!" whispered Lady Eleanor. "Alistair!" Sir Reginald took a step closer, his face pale. "Is he—" Poirot was already moving. With a careful precision that seemed almost ritualistic, he placed 2 fingers against the man's wrist. The skin was cool to the touch. He examined the body closely. No visible wounds, no sign of struggle. He leaned forward slightly, catching a faint scent on the air. "Bitter. Poison," he murmured. The room erupted in hushed whispers. Miss Beatrice. Vaughan's face had lost its usual sharpness, replaced with something more guarded. Surely not. He was fine just minutes ago. Poirot straightened, his gaze sweeping the room. A man may seem fine one moment, mademoiselle, and quite dead the next. It is the nature of poison. It gives no warning, only silence. Madame Armand took a slow breath. And so it has come to pass. Death before midnight. Her words sent a fresh shudder through the guests. Lady Eleanor turned to her husband, her face stricken. "Arthur, call the police at once." Lord Arthur nodded and strode toward the telephone. Poirot, meanwhile, lifted the letter from the desk. The ink was smudged, the final word trailing into an unfinished scrawl. His sharp eyes scanned the page, absorbing its contents. "My dear friend, I fear I must tell you the truth before it is too late. There is something terribly wrong in this house, and I—" The sentence stopped abruptly. Poirot set the letter down carefully, his mind already forming its first theories. A prophecy had been spoken, and now the game had begun. Chapter 3. Tense silence had settled over Endicott Hall. The guests lingered in the dimly lit study, their eyes darting between Poirot and the lifeless form of Alistair Graves. The crackling fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows across the room, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed 11 times. Poirot straightened, smoothing the lapels of his suit. His keen eyes scanned the room, lingering on the faces of those present. Fear, shock, and something else, something deeper, lurked beneath their carefully composed exteriors. Lord Arthur Endicott returned, his expression grave. The police have been called. They should arrive within the hour. Good, good, Poirot murmured, nodding. He turned his attention back to the body. His sharp gaze moved over the deceased's features. Peaceful, almost undisturbed. No struggle, no violence. Only the faint scent of something bitter in the air. Poison, he repeated softly. But how was it administered? He moved to the desk, studying the half-finished letter once more. Then his eyes drifted to the glass near the deceased's hand. A brandy snifter, nearly empty. He lifted it carefully, bringing it to his nose. A faint, acrid smell greeted him. He turned the glass slightly, watching as the amber liquid swirled inside. "Brandy?" Sir Reginald muttered. "Alistair always drank brandy after dinner. It was a habit of his." "Ah," Poirot said, "but habits can be dangerous things, mon ami. A habit is something one expects, something one relies upon. And when a man's habit is known, it can be used against him." Sir Reginald shifted uncomfortably. "Are you suggesting—" Poirot held up a hand. "I suggest nothing yet, mon colonel. I only observe." He set the glass down and turned his attention to the guests. His voice, though gentle, carried an authority that could not be ignored. "Tell me, mesdames et messieurs, where was everyone at the time of the scream?" A brief silence. Then Lady Eleanor spoke first. "We were in the dining-room, as you well know, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot nodded. "We, but let us be precise. Each of you, what were you doing at that very moment?" Lord Arthur cleared his throat. "I was seated beside my wife, finishing my brandy." "I was speaking with Colonel Mortimer," Beatrice Vaughan said quickly. Sir Reginald nodded. "Indeed, we were discussing—" He hesitated, then finished. Military affairs. Poirot raised an eyebrow, but did not comment. Madame Armand folded her hands. I was merely observing, as one does. And the staff? Poirot pressed. Lord Arthur hesitated. Most of the servants were occupied in the kitchens, or clearing the dining table, except for Mary, the maid who found the body. Poirot glanced at the trembling young maid in the doorway. Mademoiselle Mary, tell me, why were you near this room? Mary swallowed hard, twisting her hands in her apron. I was fetching some extra candles, sir. The butler sent me to the supply room just down the hall. And you heard the scream? Yes, sir. I was just stepping out when I heard it. I ran toward the sound and—" she shuddered. "And I saw Mr. Graves. I knew he was dead the moment I saw him." Poirot studied her. "Did you see anyone else near this room?" She shook her head. "No, sir. The hallway was empty." Poirot tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Very well, mademoiselle. You may go for now, but do not leave the house." The maid curtsied hastily and backed out of the room. Poirot turned to the guests once more. "One thing is clear," he said. "Mr. Graves was alone when he died. The door was ajar, but there were no signs of forced entry, no indications of a struggle. The poison was most likely in his drink." He gestured to the brandy snifter. "And yet he drank it willingly." Sir Reginald frowned. "Are you saying he took his own life?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Non, mon colonel. The letter on his desk suggests otherwise. A man who fears for his life, who is desperate to reveal a secret, does not choose such a moment to end his own existence." "Then it was murder," Beatrice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mais oui, mademoiselle, and murder, you see, is never without motive." He moved to the fireplace, glancing at the ornate mantelpiece. His fingers brushed lightly against a small silver box resting there. With a flick, he opened it. Inside, a neat row of cigarettes. He took one, sniffed it, and raised an eyebrow. "Curious," he murmured. Lady Eleanor crossed her arms. "What is?" Poirot closed the box. "Nothing yet, my lady. But tell me, what kind of man was Alistair Graves?" Lord Arthur sighed. "He was a business associate of mine, a financier, clever with investments. He came here often, especially in recent months." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Recent months? And why is that?" "Because he was preparing for something," Lord Arthur admitted. "A venture, perhaps. But he was secretive about it." Beatrice Vaughan cleared her throat. "I heard whispers of trouble in his affairs. Perhaps someone wanted him silenced before he could reveal something damaging." Poirot nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But there is more to it than that, I think." His fingers traced the edge of the silver cigarette box once more. Then he turned back to the assembled guests, his dark eyes gleaming. "Murder is never a simple matter," he mused. "It is a game of deception, played by those who believe themselves clever. But in the end, mes amis, the truth has a way of revealing itself." He paused, letting his words settle. "And I assure you, it will." A tense silence stretched between them. Then, from somewhere deep within the house, the grandfather clock chimed midnight. The prophecy had been fulfilled, and the real game had only just begun. Chapter 4. The sombre silence of Endicott Hall deepened as the distant echo of the grandfather clock's final chime faded. The guests still gathered in the study exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot, standing near the fireplace, let his gaze drift from one person to the next, measuring reactions, cataloguing the nuances of their fear, their guilt, or perhaps their well-practiced innocence. Inspector James Crawford arrived at last, his heavy boots thudding against the polished wood floor. He was a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face, the sort that had seen too much crime to be easily impressed. His sharp eyes took in the scene with professional detachment. "Another murder, another night of questions," he muttered, stepping forward. His gaze settled on Poirot, and a hint of irritation flickered in his expression. "You again, Poirot. Why is it that wherever there's trouble, you're not far behind?" Poirot smiled mildly. "Ah, but you see, mon ami, I do not create the trouble. I merely ensure it does not go unanswered." Crawford grunted. He turned to the body of Alistair Graves and surveyed the scene. "Poisoning, is it?" "Oui," Poirot confirmed. "Subtle, precise. A method of killing that speaks of premeditation, not passion." The inspector frowned, nodding toward the brandy glass. "That the source?" "It seems likely, but I will not assume," Poirot said. "Assumptions, mon cher inspecteur, are dangerous things. We must deal in certainties." Crawford shot him a look, but said nothing. Instead, he turned to the guests, his expression hardening. "All right, let's hear it. Who was the last to see Mr. Graves alive?" A murmur rippled through the group. It was Beatrice Vaughan who answered first. "We all saw him at dinner, of course, but afterward I believe Colonel Mortimer spoke to him privately." Sir Reginald Mortimer stiffened. "A brief conversation," he admitted gruffly, "about business, nothing more." "And then?" Crawford prompted. Grudgingly, Sir Reginald continued. "Graves mentioned he needed to finish a letter in the study. That was the last I saw of him." Lady Eleanor spoke next, her voice smooth, practiced. "He was in here when we returned to the drawing-room. I assumed he was working. Then—" she hesitated. "Then the scream." Crawford turned to Poirot. "And you? Any insights?" Poirot lifted a hand, his fingers pressing lightly together. "I find one thing curious. Mr. Graves was, by all accounts, a man of habit. He drank brandy every night, oui?" Lord Arthur nodded. "Without fail." "And the brandy itself, where does it come from?" "From our cellars," Lord Arthur replied, "but the butler or a servant usually pours it. Tonight, I believe Graves poured his own." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, a small but significant deviation from routine, n'est-ce pas?" Crawford frowned. "You think he was poisoned before he poured the drink?" "Or that someone anticipated he would pour it himself," Poirot countered. He gestured toward the brandy decanter on the side table. "May I?" Crawford sighed but nodded. "Go ahead." Poirot lifted the decanter, sniffing it carefully. His expression did not change, but his fingers tapped thoughtfully against the glass. "A question," he said at last, turning to Lord Arthur. "How many of you drank brandy tonight?" Lord Arthur hesitated. "Myself, Colonel Mortimer, and Mr. Graves. And yet," Poirot murmured, "only one of you is dead." The weight of his words settled over the room. "You think the poison was in his glass, not the decanter?" Crawford asked. Perhaps, Poirot said. Or perhaps the poison was administered another way entirely. A sharp intake of breath came from Beatrice Vaughan. But then it could be any of us who did it. Mais oui, mademoiselle, Poirot said softly, and that is precisely the problem, n'est-ce pas? Crawford straightened. I'll have the drink analyzed, of course. But if you have another theory, Poirot, let's hear it. Poirot gave a small, enigmatic smile. Patience, mon ami. I have many theories. But the truth, that will take a little more time. He turned back to the guests, his gaze sharp. Tell me, did Mr. Graves have any known enemies? Lord Arthur hesitated. Business rivals, certainly, but nothing. Lord Arthur hesitated. Business rivals, certainly, but nothing I'd call enmity. Though. He exchanged a look with Lady Eleanor. Though, Poirot prompted. Lady Eleanor sighed. There was something troubling him of late. A shadow over his affairs, a sense of paranoia. He believed someone was watching him. Did he say who? She shook her head. No, but he grew increasingly agitated. He mentioned a prophecy. A ripple of discomfort passed through the group. Poirot's eyebrows rose. A prophecy, you say? Yes, she murmured. He said someone had warned him, told him he would die before the week was out. Crawford scoffed. Sounds like nonsense. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone unreadable. And yet, here he is, dead, exactly as foretold. A hush fell over the room. Poirot, however, merely adjusted his cuffs. Tell me, does anyone else recall this warning? A long pause. Then, from the corner of the room, Madame Armand, the French widow, spoke. Her voice was smooth, almost amused. I heard it too, Monsieur Poirot, she said. A warning whispered in the dark. And do you know the most interesting part? Poirot tilted his head. Enlighten me, madam. She leaned forward, her dark eyes gleaming. The voice that whispered it belonged to Alistair Graves himself. A murmur of shock swept through the guests. Poirot, however, merely folded his hands behind his back, his expression thoughtful. Curious, he said softly. Very curious indeed. And with that, he turned back towards the brandy glass, his mind already working through the delicate puzzle of a prophecy that had seemingly come true. Chapter 5. The revelation that Alistair Graves had seemingly predicted his own demise sent a fresh chill through the air of Endicott Hall. Inspector Crawford let out an incredulous scoff, shaking his head. You're telling me the man who's dead warned himself of his own murder? What kind of nonsense is that? Madame Armand tilted her head, her dark eyes glittering in the dim candlelight. Not nonsense, Inspector. A certainty. He said it to me 2 nights ago, just before dinner. He told me, by the end of the week, I shall be dead. They have already decided it. A murmur rippled through the assembled guests. Poirot remained silent, his gaze keen as he watched their faces, measuring the weight of their emotions, fear, shock, perhaps even the flicker of guilt. Did he say who they were, madame? Poirot finally asked. Madame Armand sighed, her slender fingers adjusting the delicate lace at her wrist. No, I asked, but he only laughed. It was not the laughter of a man amused, Monsieur Poirot. It was the laughter of a man resigned to his fate. A curious thing, Poirot murmured. He did not attempt to prevent this fate he so clearly foresaw. That is what I found so strange, she admitted. He was not afraid. He seemed prepared. Crawford folded his arms. If he knew someone wanted him dead, why didn't he go to the police? Lord Arthur shook his head. Alistair Graves was a proud man, Inspector. He would rather walk into his grave with his head held high than beg for protection. And besides, who would he have accused? That is what we must determine, Poirot said quietly. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Poirot, ever meticulous, let the moment stretch, observing the shifting stances, the nervous twitches, the way certain eyes darted toward one another with unspoken suspicion. Then he moved, with precise, deliberate steps. He walked to the decanter of brandy and once again lifted it to the light. "The brandy," he said, his voice soft yet commanding. "Is it always stored in this room?" Lord Arthur nodded. "Yes, we keep a selection here, for guests." "And the bottle in question, was it opened tonight?" "No," Beatrice Vaughan said suddenly. "I remember because I saw Alistair pour from it last night as well." "Ah!" Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. "Then if it were poisoned, the attempt could have been made days in advance, n'est-ce pas?" Crawford frowned. "Which means the killer might not have known exactly when he'd drink it." "Unless," Poirot interjected smoothly, "they knew he would." "Drink it tonight." Another ripple of unease passed through the room. Poirot turned, his sharp eyes locking onto Lady Eleanor. "Madam, you were the one to mention his recent paranoia. Was it something you observed yourself, or did Mr. Graves confide in you?" Lady Eleanor hesitated, her gloved hands tightening over her lap. "Both," she admitted. "He seemed withdrawn, distracted, and then there was the letter." "Letter?" Crawford perked up. "What letter?" Lady Eleanor sighed. "He received an anonymous note yesterday afternoon. He didn't show it to me, but I could see it unsettled him greatly." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And where is this letter now?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't know. He took it with him when he left the drawing-room last night. It may still be in his study." Crawford turned to the constable at his side. "Search the study. Find that letter." Poirot, however, seemed far away in thought. His fingers tapped lightly against his sleeve as he pieced together the implications. A prophecy, a man resigned to death, a letter, and a poisoning method that required advanced planning. The murderer had not acted in the heat of the moment. No, this was cold, deliberate. The pieces were aligning, but there was still one question that weighed heavily in Poirot's mind. Why had Alistair Graves accepted his fate so readily? As if on cue, the constable returned, a folded piece of paper in his gloved hands. "Sir, we found this in the drawer of Mr. Graves's desk." Crawford snatched it up, unfolding it quickly. His brow furrowed as he read aloud. "You have seen too much. The debt must be paid. Before the week is out, you will take your final drink." A collective gasp swept the room. Poirot, however, merely nodded. "Ah, a debt, you say?" He took the letter from Crawford, studying it closely. The paper was of fine quality, the ink smudged slightly at the edges, but something about the handwriting intrigued him. Beatrice Vaughan leaned forward, her voice a whisper. So it was a warning. Someone wanted him to know his death was inevitable. Perhaps, Poirot murmured. Or perhaps it was a clever deception, designed to make him believe that. Crawford rubbed his temples. So, either the killer sent it to taunt him, or someone else wanted him to think he was doomed. Just so, mon ami. Poirot's lips curled in the faintest smile. And tell me, have you considered the third possibility? Crawford scowled. Which is? Poirot turned the letter over, his fingers brushing the edges with care. That Alistair Graves wrote it himself. A stunned silence fell over the room. But why would he do that? Lady Eleanor demanded. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, that, madame, is the question, is it not? He tapped the letter against his palm. Consider it. A man who predicts his own murder. A man who receives a warning, yet does nothing to prevent his fate. A man who drinks from a decanter that may or may not have been tampered with. He turned, his gaze sweeping across the assembled guests. What does it suggest to you? Madame Armand's voice was soft but certain. That he wanted to die. Poirot nodded. It is possible, and yet the method of his death suggests otherwise. If one wishes to end one's own life, there are simpler ways than poison. No, mes amis, this was not suicide. He lifted the letter, his voice dropping to a near whisper. But it may have been a game. Crawford's frustration was evident. A game? Poirot, what the devil are you suggesting? Poirot smiled, his fingers pressing lightly together. That our dear Mr. Graves was playing a most dangerous game. One where he knew he was the bait, but perhaps underestimated the hunter. He let his words settle. Then, with a graceful motion, he folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. This case, he murmured, is more intricate than it appears. And as the flames crackled in the fireplace, their light casting long shadows across the faces of the assembled guests, a single thought lingered in Poirot's mind. If Alistair Graves had truly known his own fate, why had he still taken that final drink? The answer, he suspected, lay buried beneath layers of deception, and Hercule Poirot intended to unearth it. Chapter 6. The letter, still crisp in Poirot's hand, carried a weight far greater than ink on paper. It was a message, a warning, or perhaps a deception. And in its careful phrasing, Poirot sensed the fingerprints of a cunning mind. Inspector Crawford rubbed his chin, his frustration mounting. So, let me get this straight. You think Graves either wrote this letter himself or received it from someone playing a twisted game? Poirot nodded. Exactement, mon ami. The question is, was it a game of his own design, or one in which he was but an unwilling pawn? Lady Eleanor's expression darkened. You believe he suspected his own murder? That he invited it? That, madam, is what we must discover. Beatrice Vaughan shivered, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. If he knew someone meant to kill him, he must have known who. But then why didn't he act? Poirot turned the letter over, running a thoughtful finger along its edges. Perhaps he did act. Perhaps he was seeking proof. A low murmur swept through the drawing-room. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced over the worried faces of the guests. Then a voice, hesitant, uncertain, broke the silence. I saw him with a book, said young Charles Endicott. All eyes turned to him. The heir to Endicott Hall, barely in his 20s, shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. Poirot's brow lifted. "A book, you say?" "Yes," Charles said, glancing at Lord Arthur before continuing. "Last night, after dinner, I went to his study to return a book I borrowed. He was already inside, hunched over his desk. He didn't even look up when I knocked. He was flipping through the pages of some old journal, muttering to himself." "What was he saying?" Poirot asked. Charles hesitated. "Something about debts, about accounts that had to be settled." A heavy silence fell over the room. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And this journal, where is it now?" "I don't know," Charles admitted. "When I left, he was still reading it." Crawford wasted no time. "We need to find that journal." At his order, the constables moved swiftly to search the study once more, leaving the guests in tense silence. Poirot, however, remained deep in thought. A journal, a letter, a prophecy of death. Was Alistair Graves a man burdened by guilt, a victim of a scheme, or something far more dangerous? A man who knew exactly what was coming and chose not to escape it. Moments later, the constables returned, shaking their heads. "The journal is gone." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Gone?" "Yes, sir. The desk was tidy, the drawers locked. But there's no sign of the journal young Mr. Endicott described." Arthur exhaled slowly. "Then someone took it." Madame Armand's voice was sharp. "Who would have wanted it?" Poirot's gaze swept the room. The answer, he knew, was among them, and whoever had taken that journal knew precisely what secrets it held. Chapter 7, A Missing Journal, a dead man who had foreseen his fate, and a room full of secrets, each concealed behind carefully measured expressions. Hercule Poirot folded his hands before him and surveyed the gathered suspects. Someone among them had taken the journal. But why? To hide its contents, or to ensure that its revelations never saw the light of day? Inspector Crawford gestured for his constables to extend the search beyond the study. But Poirot shook his head. "Non, mon ami. A thief with foresight does not discard the object of his crime so readily. If the journal was taken, it is either still within these walls, or it has been carefully destroyed. Beatrice Vaughan stiffened. "You mean to say the killer took it?" Poirot gave her a pointed look. "Madame, I say only that its absence is no accident." Lady Eleanor, her fingers twitching against the folds of her dress, looked away. "This is madness. Do you believe we are harboring a murderer? A murderer, perhaps. A liar, most certainly." Poirot's voice was quiet, yet it carried weight. He turned his sharp gaze toward young Charles Endicott. "Monsieur Endicott, you say you saw Graves reading this journal last night. Were you certain of what you saw?" Charles swallowed. "Yes, he was reading intently. But did you see where he placed it afterward?" A pause. Then Charles shook his head. "No, I left before he put it away." Poirot tapped his fingers against his chin. "Alors, then we must ask ourselves, if Graves feared for his life, would he not have secured such an important document?" Crawford grunted. "Locked it up somewhere, perhaps." "Or left it with someone he trusted," Poirot murmured. Silence settled like a heavy shroud over the group. Someone shifted in their seat. A log in the fireplace cracked loudly, and then, as if pulled by an invisible thread, all eyes turned toward Lord Arthur. The old man scoffed. "Surely you don't think I had anything to do with this?" Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he studied Lord Arthur with the precision of a man reading between the lines of an unfinished story. "Monsieur, did Alistair Graves confide in you before his death?" Arthur's face darkened. "No." A heartbeat. Then Poirot asked, "Did you see him at all last night after dinner?" Arthur's fingers curled into fists. I went to bed early. I didn't see him." Poirot's eyes flickered. "Did you?" Arthur stiffened. It was the smallest hesitation, a mere fraction of a second. But for Poirot, it was as revealing as a signed confession. Before the silence could settle, a sudden cry rang through the house. A maid burst into the room, her face pale as chalk. "Sir, we've found something." Poirot and Crawford exchanged a glance before following the trembling maid down the hallway. The others trailed behind, a current of hushed whispers filling the air. At last they reached the library. There, in front of the grand oak bookshelf, a constable stood holding a small charred object in his gloved hands. A book, or what remained of it. The edges were blackened, the cover reduced to curling embers. But despite the fire's destruction, a few pages inside had been spared. Poirot leaned in, his expression unreadable, as he plucked a half-burnt sheet from the remains. The ink was smudged, the words fragmented, but one sentence stood clear: the debt must be paid, no matter the cost. The room fell deathly silent. Poirot straightened, his gaze scanning the faces around him. Someone had tried to erase the truth, but the truth had a way of surviving. "Bon," he murmured. "Now we begin to understand." And as Poirot turned the page, the first whispers of the real conspiracy began to emerge. Chapter 8. A burned journal, a cryptic message, and a room filled with nervous eyes. Hercule Poirot held the half-charred page delicately, as though the words themselves might crumble to ash in his fingers. The debt must be paid, no matter the cost. The phrase lingered in, the air thick with implication. Poirot studied the gathered faces one by one, noting every flicker of discomfort, every tightening of the jaw. Someone here knew exactly what this message meant. Inspector Crawford crossed his arms. "So what does this tell us, Poirot? That Graves, was in debt?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Not necessarily in the financial sense, mon ami. A debt, oui, but of what nature? That is the question." Lady Eleanor took an uneasy step forward. "Are you suggesting someone was blackmailing Alistair? Or perhaps he was the one holding the power?" Poirot countered smoothly. "It is equally possible that he knew something, a secret so dangerous that someone was willing to kill for it." A sharp breath came from the corner of the room. All eyes turned to young Charles Endicott, who had turned visibly pale. He licked his lips, his gaze darting toward the fireplace as if considering an escape. Poirot smiled faintly. "Monsieur Endicott, it would seem you have something on your mind." Charles hesitated. I don't know anything about a debt." "Ah, but I did not ask about the debt," Poirot said, tilting his head. "Yet that is what troubles you. Why is that?" Charles flinched as though struck. I only meant—" "You meant that you do, in fact, know something," Poirot finished for him. "Come now, mon cher, let us not play this game. What is it that you are hiding?" Charles swallowed, his hands gripping the back of a nearby chair. "It's not much," he said at last. "But last week I overheard Graves speaking with Lord Arthur. They were in the study, and they didn't know I was outside the door." A hushed tension fell over the room. Lord Arthur's face darkened. "What did you hear?" Inspector Crawford demanded. Charles hesitated. "Graves said something about settling an old score, and Lord Arthur, he sounded angry. He told Graves to stop digging up ghosts before someone got hurt." Lord Arthur stepped forward, his face red with fury. "How dare you eavesdrop on me, boy?" Charles flinched but held his ground. "I wasn't trying to. I was looking for my book, and I just happened to hear it." Poirot watched the exchange closely, his fingers pressed together in thought. He turned to Lord Arthur with mild curiosity. "Monsieur, would you care to explain what this old score entailed?" Arthur let out a harsh laugh. "Utter nonsense! Graves was a meddler, always looking into things best left forgotten. I told him as much, and now he's dead. That's all there is to it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "No, that is—" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "No, that is not all there is to it, Lord Arthur. In fact, I suspect that is where the heart of this mystery lies." The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the room. Lady Eleanor's hands trembled at her sides. Beatrice Vaughan's lips pressed into a thin line, and Charles Endicott looked as though he regretted ever opening his mouth. Crawford exhaled. "Poirot, do you think this old score is what got Graves killed?" Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "That, my dear Inspector, is precisely what we must determine." But even as he spoke, he knew one thing for certain. This mystery was no longer just about a single murder. It was about the past, the debts left unpaid, and the secrets that refused to remain buried. And before the night was over, another truth would come to light. Chapter 9. The house had grown colder, though whether it was the night's deepening chill or the suffocating tension, no one could tell. Poirot remained standing near the fireplace, his eyes sharp as he watched his gathered suspects. The revelation of an old score unsettled them all, though some masked it better than others. Lady Eleanor clutched a lace handkerchief in her trembling hands. Beatrice Vaughan, ever poised, sat stiffly on the settee, her fingers tapping an anxious rhythm against her knee. Lord Arthur, still red-faced with irritation, stared daggers at Charles Endicott, while the young man himself sat hunched, looking as though he wished to disappear into the furniture. Poirot turned to Inspector Crawford. "Mon ami, I require 2 things immediately. A full account of Lord Arthur's past dealings with our dear departed Mr. Graves, and secondly, an examination of the study." Crawford exhaled but nodded. "All right, I'll get a constable on it." He motioned to one of his men, who quickly left the room. Lord Arthur scoffed. "This is absurd, Poirot. Graves was a fool who didn't know when to leave things alone. I had nothing to do with his death." Poirot's gaze remained level, And yet you do not deny that he was prying into a matter which you wished forgotten. Arthur's jaw clenched. Whatever he was after, whatever score he thought he had to settle, it was his business, not mine. Was it? Poirot murmured. He stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. Let us consider the facts, Graves spoke of a debt to be paid, and now he is dead. You warned him against digging up ghosts, and yet here we are, faced with the consequences of whatever it was that so troubled him. Arthur shook his head in frustration. You're twisting my words. Poirot's moustache twitched. No, monsieur, I am listening to them very carefully. At that moment the constable returned, handing Crawford a folded piece of paper. The inspector read it, his expression darkening. Poirot, you were right to ask. Seems Mr. Graves had been making inquiries into an old land dispute, one that involved Lord Arthur's late father. A ripple of tension passed through the room. Lord Arthur straightened. That is ancient history. The matter was settled long ago. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet Monsieur Graves was not convinced. He turned to Charles. Tell me, young man, you heard this conversation. Did Mr. Graves seem fearful? Charles hesitated. Not fearful, no, but determined, like he had found something important. Bon, Poirot said softly. Then let us consider what he may have found. He turned back to Lord Arthur. Monsieur, I must ask you plainly, was there anything suspicious regarding the resolution of this land dispute? Arthur hesitated for just a fraction of a second before scoffing. Ridiculous! But Poirot caught that hesitation. It was brief, but it was there. Before he could press further, there was a sudden knock at the door. A second constable entered, carrying a small metal box. We found this in the study, sir, he reported, hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace. The room fell deathly silent. Poirot stepped forward, studying the box. Ah, and what, I wonder, does Monsieur Graves leave behind for us? With careful precision, he opened the box. Inside, resting atop yellowed papers, was a pocket watch. A watch with initials engraved on the back. Lord Arthur's face drained of colour. Poirot turned the watch over in his hands. Tell me, monsieur, he said softly, why does a watch belonging to your late father appear in the hidden possessions of a man who was just murdered? A silence stretched so long, it seemed the walls themselves held their breath. And then Lord Arthur spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. This changes nothing. Poirot smiled faintly. Au contraire, mon cher, this changes everything. Chapter 10. The room seemed to shrink around them, as if the walls were leaning in to hear the truth that hovered in the air. Poirot's question had landed like a thunderclap. Why was Lord Arthur's father's pocket watch hidden among Graves' secret possessions? The watch gleamed in Poirot's hand, its initials, HBR, clearly visible beneath the flickering gaslight. Lord Arthur's fingers twitched at his sides, his breathing shallow. Beatrice Vaughan looked away, suddenly interested in the delicate embroidery of her sleeve. Lady Eleanor, her face drained of colour, clutched at the pearl necklace around her throat, as though it might anchor her against some invisible force. Poirot observed them all, his little grey cells working tirelessly. Let us begin at the beginning, he said softly. pacing toward the hearth. "A man is dead, murdered, and not just any man, but one who knew a secret that some among us were willing to kill for." His eyes flicked to Charles Endicott, who sat stiffly, his knuckles white against his trousers. "Monsieur Endicott, you were present when Mr. Graves made his final declaration. Tell us, how did he seem?" Charles swallowed hard, determined, angry even. He was speaking of debts that had to be repaid, of a wrong that had never been put right. "Bon," Poirot murmured. "And yet, within hours—" "Bon," Poirot murmured. "And yet, within hours, he was dead." Inspector Crawford stepped forward, his expression dark. "So, the watch, what's its connection?" Poirot tapped the polished silver surface. "This belonged to Lord Arthur's father, did it not?" Arthur inhaled sharply, his mask of defiance slipping. "Yes, it did." "Then let me ask you, how did it come to be hidden among the belongings of the very man who was investigating your family's past?" Poirot's voice was calm, but his words were sharp as knives. Arthur clenched his jaw. "I don't know." "No?" Poirot arched a brow. "Let us examine the facts, mon cher. Your father was involved in a land dispute, one that Mr. Graves had been investigating. He had, by all accounts, uncovered something that made him believe justice had not been served. Now he is dead, and the pocket watch of the very man whose dealings he was investigating is found hidden away in his study." Silence. Poirot turned, suddenly, to Beatrice Vaughan. "Mademoiselle, you were closest to Mr. Graves in his final days. Did he confide in you?" Beatrice stiffened. I don't know what you mean." Poirot gave her a knowing smile. "But I think you do. Graves trusted you, no? And yet you remain quiet." Beatrice's lips trembled, and then, with a sudden shuddering breath, she whispered, "He said he had proof." Arthur's head snapped toward her. "What?" Beatrice continued, her voice growing steadier. "He told me that he had proof that the land dispute wasn't settled fairly, that evidence had been hidden, that people had been paid off to ensure that your family's claim was upheld." Lord Arthur's face twisted with fury. "That's a damned lie!" Poirot held up a hand. "Calm yourself, monsieur. If it were truly a lie, then why was Graves killed before he could present this so-called proof?" Arthur faltered. I don't know, but I had nothing to do with it." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps not, but someone did." He turned to Lady Eleanor. "Madame, you have been uncharacteristically quiet." The widow's eyes widened, and she pressed her lips together. "What would you have me say?" "Let us consider what we know. Your husband was involved in a questionable land dispute. A man seeking to uncover the truth was murdered. And now his possessions reveal a connection to your family." Poirot's voice was gentle, but the weight of his words crushed down on her. Eleanor's eyes darted toward Arthur, then to Beatrice, then back to Poirot. And then, as if something inside her had snapped, she exhaled shakily. "You're right." Arthur turned to her stunned. "Mother!" She held up a trembling hand. "No, Arthur, it's time. The truth has been buried for far too long." Poirot's expression did not change, though his eyes sharpened. "Go on, madam." Eleanor swallowed, then looked down at the floor as if ashamed. It was all a lie. The land was never truly ours. My husband—" She hesitated. "My husband bribed the officials to ensure that the dispute ended in his favor." A murmur swept through the room. Eleanor continued, her voice growing more fragile with every word. "Graves was right. There was a debt to be paid. But I swear to you, I had no idea what he had found until it was too late." Poirot's gaze softened slightly. "And when did you realize?" Her breath caught. "The night he died, that very night." Arthur clenched his fists. "And yet you said nothing." Eleanor shook her head. I was afraid." Poirot nodded solemnly. "Fear is a powerful thing, madam." He turned back to the room. "And now we come to the heart of the matter. If Lady Eleanor did not kill Graves, then who did?" A heavy silence fell. Then Poirot turned, slowly, deliberately, to Charles Endicott. Charles stiffened. "What?" Poirot smiled faintly. "It is you, n'est-ce pas?" A chill ran through the room. Charles shook his head, but Poirot pressed on. You knew what Graves had found, did you not? And you were the only one who had the opportunity to silence him before he could reveal the truth." Charles stood abruptly. "That's insane." Poirot took a step closer. "Is it, or is it simply inevitable? You had the most to lose, did you not?" "I had nothing to lose," Charles shot back, but his voice wavered. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "But you did. You are the illegitimate grandson of the man who originally owned that land, are you not?" Gasps filled the room. Poirot nodded. "Oui. Graves knew the truth, did he not? He knew that the land your family lost was never lawfully taken. He was going to prove that you were the rightful heir. But that would mean exposing the deception, would it not? And you could not have that." Charles was frozen, his face pale. Poirot stepped closer. "And so you silenced him. You followed him that night, ensured that he could not reveal what he had found." A long, terrible pause. Then, finally, Charles Endicott let out a shuddering breath, and with it his defiance crumbled. "Yes," he whispered, "I killed him." The room erupted in shock. Poirot sighed. "The truth, it always finds its way to the surface." Charles slumped back into his chair, his face hollow. Inspector Crawford stepped forward. "Charles Endicott, you are under arrest for the murder of Albert Graves." As the constables moved in, Charles did not resist. His fight was over. Poirot watched him go, then turned to the others. "E'en so, justice is done." Lady Eleanor wiped at her eyes. "And the land?" Poirot smiled gently. "Perhaps it is time to make things right." She nodded, a glimmer of resolve in her weary expression. Poirot straightened his cuffs, then turned toward the door. "Come, Hastings," he murmured. "Our work here is done." And with that he left the room, stepping once more into the night, leaving the ghosts of old sins behind him. The end.